Story number 1. Whispers in the Corridors. I've always been skeptical of ghost stories. Growing up, I dismissed them as nothing more than tall tales told to scare children or add a bit of excitement to mundane lives. But that all changed the night I spent at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, a place that had haunted my dreams long before I ever set foot inside its storied halls. The Stanley Hotel had garnered notoriety not just for its grand architecture and breathtaking views of the Rockies, but also for the chilling tales that swirled around it. It was the inspiration for Stephen King's The Shining. And over the years, countless visitors had reported strange occurrences: shadows flitting through empty corridors, unexplained laughter echoing in the dead of night, and lights flickering on their own in vacant rooms. The ghosts of those who had met untimely ends within its walls were said to still linger, their restless spirits unable to find peace. I was drawn to the Stanley for reasons beyond mere curiosity. As a freelance writer, I was searching for a story that could revive my flagging career. The hotel's haunted reputation seemed like the perfect subject, a blend of history, mystery, and the supernatural. I booked a weekend stay, eager to experience the phenomena firsthand and perhaps uncover a story that would captivate readers. Arriving on a crisp autumn afternoon, the hotel stood majestic against the backdrop of falling leaves and towering pines. Its Victorian architecture was both elegant and imposing, with large windows reflecting the golden hues of sunset. I checked in at the front desk, the receptionist offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the Stanley. Enjoy your stay." I settled into my room on the second floor, a spacious suite with high ceilings and antique furnishings that exuded a timeless charm. As night fell, I decided to explore the hotel, camera in hand, documenting any signs of paranormal activity. The corridors were quiet, the only sound the distant ticking of a grandfather clock and the occasional creak of old wood settling. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. I began my investigation in the grand ballroom, a vast space once used for lavish parties and gatherings. The room was adorned with chandeliers, now dimmed and covered in dust, and the walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced individuals whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. I set up my equipment near the center of the room, speaking softly into my voice recorder. "This is Jack Miller, reporting from the Stanley Hotel. Tonight, I aim to capture any evidence of paranormal activity." Minutes passed with nothing out of the ordinary, until a sudden chill filled the air. My breath became visible, and the temperature seemed to drop drastically. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps approaching from the far end of the ballroom. I turned, shining my flashlight towards the source. But the room was empty. The footsteps stopped as abruptly as they had started. I dismissed it as the building's old infrastructure reacting to the cold. But my instincts told me otherwise. As I moved closer to the wall, I noticed a shadow flickering at the edge of my vision. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was present. Determined to uncover the truth, I continued my exploration, moving towards the east wing where the old library was located. The library was a sanctuary of knowledge, with shelves upon shelves of books that had seen better days. I walked along the aisles, running my fingers over the spines, until I reached a large, ornate mirror hanging on the wall. The surface was cracked, distorting my reflection into a grotesque parody of myself. As I stared into the mirror, I felt a sudden jolt of electricity, and the room seemed to warp around me. The whispers began then, soft, indistinct voices that grew louder with each passing second. I could make out fragments of conversations, cries for help, and the occasional burst of laughter that sent shivers down my spine. I backed away, trying to steady my breathing, when I saw her, a woman in a flowing white dress standing behind me in the mirror. Her face was pale, eyes hollow with sorrow, and her expression one of desperate pleading. I turned around swiftly, but the room was empty. When I glanced back at the mirror, She was gone, leaving only my own reflection staring back at me. Panic set in as I realized I was not alone. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm of voices from another time. "Help us? Remember us?" They echoed through the halls, a haunting melody of anguish and loss. I grabbed my camera and voice recorder, determined to capture evidence of what I was experiencing. As I approached the mirror again, the temperature plummeted, frost forming on the edges of the glass. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing tighter, the air thick with the weight of unseen presences. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, glass splintering across the floor, and the room erupted into chaos. Books flew off the shelves, the chandelier rattled ominously, and the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of screams and pleas. I shielded my face, coughing as shards of glass pricked my skin, and stumbled towards the exit, the sounds of torment driving me to flee. Outside, the night air was cold and still, the once vibrant hotel now a beacon of darkness against the starless sky. I leaned against the railing, heart racing, trying to make sense of the night's events. The camera and recorder in my hands were covered in dust and fingerprints, the footage on the camera jumbled and chaotic, the recorder filled with the dissonant echoes of the spirit's torment. Determined to uncover the truth behind the Stanley's hauntings, I spent the next few days delving into the hotel's history. I learned about the tragic events that had unfolded within its walls: violent deaths, mysterious disappearances, and rumors of unethical treatments that had left lasting scars on the spirits bound to the building. Each story added another layer to the dark tapestry that shrouded the Stanley. One evening, armed with my research and a renewed sense of purpose, I returned to the grand ballroom. I wanted to confront the spirits, to give them a voice and help them find peace. As I stood in the center of the room, I spoke aloud, my voice steady despite the fear that still lingered. "I know your stories. I'm here to help you remember, to help you find peace." The temperature dropped once more, the chill wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The whispers began again, softer this time, guiding me towards a hidden section of the library. I followed the voices, my flashlight leading the way to a secluded corner where an old, forgotten diary lay buried beneath a pile of books. I picked it up, the pages brittle and yellowed with age. The diary belonged to Eleanor Hartley, a nurse who had worked at the Stanley during its darkest days. Her entries were filled with accounts of patient suffering, ethical dilemmas, and the relentless pressure of keeping the facility's darkest secrets hidden. The final entries were frantic, detailing a series of unexplained deaths and a growing sense of dread that something evil was lurking within the walls. As I read her final words, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, and there she was, Eleanor, her face etched with sorrow, her eyes pleading for understanding. "You must reveal the truth," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of her pain. "Only then can we be free." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I will. Your stories will be told, and your suffering will not be forgotten." The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted, the oppressive darkness lifting as if a veil had been drawn back. The whispers softened, becoming gentle sighs of relief and gratitude. Eleanor's apparition smiled faintly before fading into the light, her spirit finally at peace, with the truth uncovered and the spirits acknowledged. The Stanley Hotel seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The unnatural coldness dissipated, replaced by a warm, comforting ambience that hinted at a newfound harmony within the walls. I knew that my presence had made a difference, that the restless souls of the Stanley had found the closure they so desperately sought. Driving away from the hotel, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The haunted halls of the Stanley were no longer places of fear and torment, but monuments to resilience and remembrance. The stories of those who had suffered within its walls would now be shared, ensuring that their pain would not be in vain. But even as I left, a lingering warmth remained, a subtle reminder that some places, no matter how dark their history, hold on to hope and the possibility of redemption. And as I continued my journey as a writer and investigator, I carried with me the lessons learned at the Stanley, knowing that every story has a voice and every spirit deserves to be heard. Story number 2. Shadows of Sacsayhuaman. I've always been captivated by places where history and mystery intertwine, where the echoes of the past linger like shadows in the twilight. As an investigative journalist, I sought out stories that defied explanation, places where the veil between reality and the supernatural seemed impossibly thin. So when I heard about the eerie occurrences at Sacsayhuaman in Cusco, Peru, I knew I had to uncover the truth behind the legends. Sacsayhuaman wasn't abandoned in the traditional sense. It was a magnificent Inca fortress perched high on the outskirts of Cusco, its massive stone walls crafted with such precision that modern engineers still marvel at their construction. But beneath its grandeur lay a history steeped in bloodshed and sorrow, a place where countless lives were lost during brutal battles and harsh treatments. The first whispers I encountered spoke of strange noises echoing through the night, footsteps that seemed to follow visitors, voices carried by the wind, and the unmistakable sound of children laughing in the darkness. Locals believed that the spirits of those who perished within the walls still roamed the fortress, unable to find peace after enduring unimaginable suffering. Determined to get to the bottom of these claims, I arranged a trip to Cusco, eager to experience Sacsayhuaman firsthand. The journey was long, winding through the rugged Andean terrain, but the anticipation kept me going. When I finally arrived, the fortress stood imposing against the twilight sky, its stone walls bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. As dusk settled, I made my way through the entrance, the massive stones towering above me like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of earth and stone, a testament to the centuries of history embedded in every corner of the fortress. Armed with my camera, voice recorder, and a notebook, I began my exploration, intent on documenting any paranormal activity that might confirm the legends. The first night was uneventful. The fortress was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the distant calls of nocturnal animals and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I set up my equipment in a central courtyard, the moon casting long shadows across the ancient stones. Hours passed with no signs of anything unusual, but I remained vigilant, knowing that the true nature of Sacsayhuaman's hauntings might reveal itself under the cover of darkness. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped noticeably, a chill that wasn't there before. I wrapped my jacket tighter, the cold seeping into my bones. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, drifting through the courtyard. I paused, listening intently. The whisper seemed to call my name, a sorrowful plea carried by the wind. "Daniel!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper came again, slightly louder this time, echoing off the stone walls. "Daniel, help us!" Summoning my courage, I followed the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The whispers led me to a narrow corridor, the stones cold and damp beneath my feet. As I walked deeper into the fortress, the air grew colder, the whispers growing more insistent. Suddenly, the corridor opened into a small chamber, the walls adorned with intricate Inca carvings that seemed to come alive under the flashlight's glare. In the center of the room stood a figure, an apparition of a woman in traditional Inca attire. Her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow, she stared directly at me, her presence overwhelming. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice echoing in the confined space. I took a step forward, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want to help. What happened here?" Her form flickered, and images began to flash before my eyes, visions of battles, screams, and flames consuming the fortress. I saw families torn apart, soldiers lost in the chaos, and the relentless march of time erasing lives in its wake. "They cannot rest," she continued, her voice breaking. "Their pain endures, their stories untold." Determined to uncover the truth, I pressed on. "What can I do to help?" The apparition reached out a translucent hand, her fingers grazing my shoulder with an icy touch. Remember us. Share our stories. Let our voices be heard. Before I could respond, the room plunged into darkness, the whispers turning into anguished cries that filled the air. I felt a presence pressing down on me, the weight of countless souls bearing down on my conscience. The temperature soared, and the images of suffering intensified, pulling me deeper into the fortress's tragic past. When the light returned, the chamber was empty, the apparition gone. I stood there, breathless and shaken, the sorrow of Sacsayhuaman's history etched into my very being. I knew then that my mission was clear. I had to bring these stories to light, to honor the memories of those who had suffered within these walls. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in research, delving into historical records, speaking with local historians, and interviewing descendants of those who had lived through the fortress's dark days. Each piece of the puzzle revealed more about the atrocities that had taken place, the pain that had been inflicted, and the lingering spirits that still roamed Sacsayhuaman. One night, armed with newfound knowledge and a deep sense of purpose, I returned to the fortress. The whispers greeted me like old friends, guiding me to the very heart of Sacsayhuaman. I stood in the central courtyard, surrounded by the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of human suffering. The air was thick with anticipation, the spirits aware of my presence and my intent to give them a voice. I began to speak, recounting the stories I had uncovered, my voice steady despite the fear that still lingered. I honor your memories. I share your stories so that your pain is not forgotten, so that you can finally find peace. As I spoke, the atmosphere shifted, the oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warm, soothing presence that seemed to envelop the fortress. The whispers softened, transforming into gentle sighs of relief and gratitude. The apparition of the woman in white appeared once more, her eyes now filled with hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a balm to the tortured souls trapped within the stones. "You have set us free." With those final words, the spirits of Sacsayhuaman began to fade, their presence becoming one with the night. The fortress stood silent once more, but the weight of its history had been lifted, replaced by a sense of peace that had eluded it for decades. Driving away from Sacsayhuaman, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and closure. The stories of the past had been heard, their voices carried into the present, ensuring that the suffering endured within those walls would never be forgotten. The experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the unseen struggles that linger in the shadows of history. And every time I think back to that night on Sacsayhuaman, I'm reminded that some places hold onto their stories too tightly, waiting for someone to listen, to remember, and to help them find peace. Because in the heart of Peru, amidst the ancient stones and lingering whispers, the spirits of the past continue to echo their tales, forever entwined with the present, yearning for remembrance and redemption. Story number 3. Whispers of North Brother. I've always been fascinated by places steeped in history and haunted by untold stories. North Brother Island in New York has long been a source of intrigue and dread, a forgotten relic of a bygone era when fear of disease drove people to isolation. Once home to a quarantine hospital for tuberculosis and other infectious diseases, the island was abandoned in the 1960s, leaving behind decaying buildings and echoes of suffering. As a paranormal investigator, I couldn't resist the pull of North Brother Island, eager to uncover the secrets that lingered in its desolate halls. The ferry ride to the island was uneventful. The water calm under the overcast sky. The hospital loomed in the distance, its Gothic architecture partially obscured by overgrown vegetation and the relentless march of time. The gate, once imposing and authoritative, now stood ajar, creaking gently in the breeze as if welcoming or warning me to enter. I arrived on the island just as dusk began to settle, the fading light casting long shadows across the ground. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of moss and decay. Armed with my camera, voice recorder, and a notebook, I stepped onto the cracked pavement. The remnants of a once bustling facility now eerily silent. The hospital complex was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, each one telling a story of isolation and despair. I made my way through the main entrance, the large double doors groaning open at my touch. Inside, the grand lobby was a ghostly shell of its former self, the chandelier hanging precariously from the ceiling, its crystals tarnished and dull. Dust particles floated in the beam of my flashlight, dancing in the stillness like tiny specters. As I ventured deeper into the building, the temperature seemed to drop, a chill that wasn't there before. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floors were littered with debris, broken furniture, shattered glass, and remnants of medical equipment that hinted at the horrors once endured within these walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water from a leaky ceiling. I reached the patient wards, long abandoned and left to the mercy of time. Each room was a testament to the suffering that had transpired here. Hospital beds lay empty, their restraints still attached, as if the patients had vanished into thin air. The air was thick with the remnants of antiseptic and the faint scent of mildew. As I explored one of the rooms, my flashlight caught something unexpected, a mirror, cracked and stained, hanging on the wall opposite the bed. I approached it cautiously, the glass reflecting a distorted version of the room. That's when I saw her, a woman in a white dress, standing silently by the window. Her eyes were hollow, staring directly at me with a sorrow that seemed to pierce through my very soul. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the vast emptiness. She didn't respond. Instead, she began to move towards me, her footsteps silent on the hard floor. I reached out, trying to capture her image with my camera, but she faded before I could get a clear shot, leaving behind only the chill in the air and the lingering sense of her presence. Shaken, I turned away, the weight of her silent plea pressing down on me. I continued my exploration, determined to uncover the truth behind the hauntings. The whispers began then, faint, almost imperceptible voices that seemed to float through the corridors, growing louder as I moved deeper into the heart of the hospital. "Help us. Remember us." The voices were fragmented, overlapping with each other, creating a dissonant symphony of sorrow and pain. I followed the sounds, my flashlight guiding me toward the old administration office. The room was cluttered with dusty files and broken furniture, the remnants of a time when decisions made within these walls dictated life and death. As I sifted through the papers, I stumbled upon a journal belonging to Dr. Eleanor Harding, a nurse who had worked at North Brother Island during its peak years. Her entries were filled with meticulous notes about patient care. But beneath the surface, there was a growing sense of desperation and fear. Late entries hinted at unapproved experiments and unethical treatments, a dark undercurrent that contradicted the facade of compassionate care. A sudden noise made me jump, a door slamming shut somewhere in the building. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. I grabbed my voice recorder, intent on capturing any evidence of the paranormal activity, and ventured towards the source of the sound. The hallway twisted and turned, leading me to the old surgical wing. The doors were ajar, swinging gently as if moved by an unseen hand. I stepped inside, the cold air wrapping around me like a shroud. The room was filled with rusty surgical instruments and broken glass, the remnants of countless procedures left unfinished. As I moved closer to the operating table, the whispers coalesced into a coherent plea. "Find the truth. Set us free." I felt a presence behind me, and as I turned, I saw her again, Dr. Harding, her figure translucent and ethereal. Her eyes were filled with a profound sadness, and her voice echoed in my mind. "You must uncover our suffering. Bring justice to our memories." Before I could respond, the room plunged into darkness, the only light emanating from my flashlight flickering wildly. The temperature dropped further, and the whispers turned into agonized cries. I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and unyielding, pulling me towards the window. I resisted, fighting against the invisible force, my mind racing with the urgency of her message. The door slammed shut, and I found myself back in the administration office, my heart pounding in my chest. The journal lay open on the desk, the last entry scrawled in hurried, desperate handwriting. They are restless. The truth must come to light, or we will remain trapped in this cycle of pain and suffering. I knew what I had to do. The spirits of North Brother Island were bound by the secrets of their suffering, their inability to find peace rooted in the injustice they had endured. I vowed to bring their stories to the world, to shed light on the dark history that had been buried for far too long. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in the research, piecing together the accounts of those who had survived the hospital's darkest days and the official reports that attempted to mask the true horrors. I spoke with former staff members, survivors, and historians, uncovering a web of deceit and brutality that had tainted the very foundation of North Brother Island. One evening, as I was compiling my findings, the whispers returned this time, more coherent and supportive. "Thank you. You are helping us." I looked up to see Dr. Harding's apparition standing by the window, her expression one of hope and gratitude. "You have our voices now. Use them wisely." With the information gathered, I published a comprehensive exposé on North Brother Island, detailing the unethical practices and the untold suffering of its patients. The story sent shockwaves through the community, prompting further investigations and official acknowledgments of the atrocities committed within the hospital's walls. The hauntings at North Brother Island ceased shortly after the publication, as if the spirits had finally found the closure they so desperately sought. The whispers faded, replaced by a serene silence that spoke of peace achieved through truth and justice. Driving away from the island for the last time, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The voices of the past had been heard, their stories told, and their spirits at rest. But the experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the importance of uncovering the truth. No matter how dark or painful it may be, North Brother Island remains a place of historical significance, its abandoned buildings standing as silent witnesses to the suffering endured by its inhabitants. But now, it also stands as a beacon of truth, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of justice. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I can still feel the presence of those lost souls, a gentle reminder that even in death, their stories continue to echo through the corridors of time, urging us to remember, to honor, and to never forget the lessons of the past. Story number 4. Echoes of Asylum Steampunk. I've always been drawn to places where the past refuses to stay buried, where the walls hold secrets too dark to be forgotten. As a paranormal investigator, my job often took me to abandoned buildings, forgotten by time but not by memory. But nothing could have prepared me for the chilling experience that awaited me at Asylum Steampunk in rural Ohio. It was a crisp October evening when I arrived at the decrepit structure. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the asylum cloaked in darkness, its silhouette stark against the fading light. The building, once a bustling center for mental health treatment, had been abandoned since its closure in the early 90s. Now, it stood as a relic of a bygone era, its steampunk architectural elements twisted by neglect and time. The stories had drawn me here, tales of apparitions appearing in mirrors, disembodied whispers echoing through empty halls, and doors that opened and closed on their own. Locals spoke of an unnatural coldness that enveloped the building, making visitors feel perpetually watched. Intrigued and undeterred by the warnings, I decided to spend the night documenting any paranormal activity. Equipped with my camera, voice recorder, and a notebook, I approached the main entrance. The once grand double doors hung crookedly on their hinges, groaning softly as the wind pushed against them. I pushed the doors open, the hinges protesting loudly, and stepped into the foyer. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of mold and decay permeated every corner. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing remnants of a time long past. Faded wallpaper peeled away from the walls, and shattered glass littered the floor. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky ceiling. I set up my equipment in what had once been the reception area, now a haunting shell of its former self. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew colder, a chill that seeped into my bones despite the summer night outside. I began my survey, moving cautiously through the labyrinthine corridors. Each step echoed louder than the last, amplifying the eerie stillness. My flashlight caught glimpses of old medical equipment, abandoned patient files scattered across tables, and rusted beds that no longer held life. I reached the first room on my left, its door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I found myself in what was once a patient's room. The bed was still intact, sheets tangled around the mattress, and the window was broken, allowing a sliver of moonlight to illuminate the room. As I stepped closer, my flashlight flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. That's when I saw her, a pale figure standing by the mirror, her reflection staring back at me with hollow eyes. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond, but her presence was palpable, the air around her growing colder. I reached for my camera, aiming it at the apparition, but she vanished before the shutter could click, leaving behind only the lingering chill and the faint sound of her soft sobbing. Shaken, I continued my exploration, determined to uncover more evidence. The whispers began then, faint, almost inaudible voices that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I followed the sound down a narrow hallway, the voices growing slightly louder with each step. They were fragmented, disjointed phrases that left me more confused than frightened. As I turned a corner, I found myself in a large common area, the remnants of social activities now nothing more than broken furniture and torn curtains. Suddenly, the doors lining the hallway began to slam shut, one after the other, as if invisible hands were toying with them. The sound reverberated through the building, making my heart race with adrenaline. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing as the doors continued their chaotic dance. That's when I felt it, a presence watching me, an unexplainable sensation that made my skin crawl. I spun around, flashlight scanning the room, but there was no one there. The whispers intensified, now forming a haunting chorus that seemed to speak directly to me. "Remember us? Remember our pain." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to speak. "I'm here to help. I want to understand." The temperature plummeted further, my breath visible in the icy air. From the shadows emerged multiple figures, patients and staff long gone, their apparitions flickering like faulty projectors. They moved through the room, their expressions etched with sorrow and despair, leaving trails of frost in their wake. One figure stood out, a woman in a flowing white dress, her hair disheveled, eyes vacant. She approached me slowly, reaching out a translucent hand. "Don't forget us," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. Before I could respond, the ground beneath me seemed to shake, the building groaning under the weight of unseen forces. The apparitions began to fade, their final whispers lingering in the air. I stood alone in the now silent room, the oppressive cold lifting as suddenly as it had descended, determined to leave with tangible evidence. I hurried to document everything before making my escape. As I navigated the maze-like halls, the feeling of being watched never left me. Every mirror I passed showed fleeting glimpses of past tragedies, faces twisted in pain, eyes that held untold stories. In the heart of the asylum, I found the old records room, its doors sealed shut. Using a crowbar, I forced the doors open, revealing shelves lined with dusty files and faded photographs. I began sifting through the records, piecing together the history of asylum steampunk. The asylum had been a place of both hope and horror, where innovative treatments often bordered on the unethical. Reports of abuse and neglect were commonplace, hidden away from the public eye. As I delved deeper, I uncovered the story of Eleanor Ellie Thompson, a nurse who had dedicated her life to caring for the patients. Her dedication was met with resistance from the administration, leading to a tragic confrontation that ended with her untimely death. Her spirit, along with countless others, remained trapped within the asylum's walls, their pain and suffering echoing through the corridors. The realization hit me hard. This place was more than just an abandoned building. It was a prison for lost souls, their unfinished stories haunting the very fabric of the asylum. I knew I had to do something, to give these spirits a voice and help them find peace. With renewed determination, I decided to hold a memorial, inviting local historians and those who had witnessed the paranormal activity to join me. Together, we shared the stories of those who had suffered, bringing light to the darkness that had consumed asylum steampunk for decades. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow through the broken windows, the atmosphere in the asylum shifted. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and closure. The apparitions no longer haunted the halls. Instead, their presence felt like a gentle reminder of resilience and remembrance. Driving away from asylum steampunk, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The spirits had found peace, their stories finally heard and acknowledged. The once haunted asylum now stood as a testament to the power of truth and the importance of remembering those who had been forgotten. But even as I left, a lingering chill remained, a subtle reminder that some echoes of the past never truly fade. And as I continued my journey as a paranormal investigator, I carried with me the lessons learned at Asylum Steampunk, stories that demand to be told, souls yearning for redemption, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest places, there is hope for healing and peace. Story number 5. Shadows of Oradour. It was a gray afternoon when I first set foot in Oradour-sur-Glane. The sky was overcast. A wash of pale clouds stretched thin over the fields, and the wind carried a hush that felt like a held breath. I come to France in search of stories, true stories, the kind that linger in old ruins and whispered legends. As a journalist, I'd learned that some truths are buried beneath decades of silence, waiting for someone curious enough, or foolish enough, to uncover them. Oradour-sur-Glane wasn't your typical tourist attraction. In 1944, the village had been the site of a horrific massacre. 642 villagers killed in a single, brutal afternoon during the war, their lives extinguished by an act of unspeakable cruelty. After the war ended, the village was left as it was, burned-out walls, abandoned cars rusting in the streets, a frozen tableau of violence and suffering. They called it a memorial, a reminder of what humanity could become if it allowed hatred to rule. I'd read the accounts, watched old footage, and spoken to historians who described the silence as almost deafening. People said that if you lingered long enough among those charred ruins, you could feel the presence of the dead, their spirits clinging to the broken stones like ivy. Some even claimed to hear voices carried on the wind, footsteps echoing through empty doorways, and the faint laughter of children long gone. I told myself I didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but as I passed through the old archway at the village entrance, something in the air made my skin prickle. The remains of Oradour were laid out before me, hollowed shells of buildings, skeletal frames of cars, a street that led nowhere. The wind sighed through empty windows, stirring dust and memories. There were a few other visitors scattered around, but everyone spoke in hushed tones, as though afraid to wake something that slumbered beneath the silence. I wandered down the main street, my footsteps hollow on the cracked pavement. The remnants of a bakery caught my eye, its door warped and blackened, the sign barely legible. Inside, only charred beams and a scorched counter remained. I stood there, imagining the baker who once rose before dawn, kneading dough and shaping loaves in the soft morning light. Now there was nothing but ash and ruin. That's when I heard the whisper. It might have been the wind, I told myself, but it sounded like a voice, soft and urgent. Just behind me, I spun around, my heart skipping a beat. to see nothing but the empty street and the leaning walls. A chill crawled up my spine, and I took a steadying breath. The wind gusted again, carrying with it a faint scent of burning wood. Or was that just my imagination? I continued exploring, drawn deeper into the heart of Orador's silence. A hollowed-out church stood at the edge of the village, its walls cracked, the bell tower empty. The massacre had taken many lives here, trapping villagers inside as the flames consumed them. I stepped through the open doorway, careful not to disturb the stillness. Inside, broken pews lay scattered, and a gaping hole in the roof let in a beam of cold, gray light. I felt the temperature drop. Suddenly, I could see my breath clouding in front of me, even though it wasn't that chilly outside. The silence became oppressive, pressing against my ears, and I had the uneasy sensation that I was not alone. I turned slowly, my flashlight sweeping the corners. The beam caught something, a shape, a hint of movement near the altar. My heart hammered in my chest as I approached, expecting to find another tourist. But there was no one there. Just as I was about to leave, I heard it again, a sound like distant sobbing. I froze, listening. The sobs were faint, muffled, as though coming from behind thick walls. They rose and fell, a heartbreaking sound that tightened my throat. I whispered, "Hello?" into the stillness, feeling foolish even as I did it. The sobbing stopped immediately, replaced by a tense hush. I backed out of the church, skin crawling. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the shattered frames of houses. I decided to head toward the car that lay rusted in the street, an old relic abandoned where it had stopped so many decades ago. As I approached, the wind died, and the world held its breath once more. Leaning against the warped metal, I tried to collect myself. This place, there was something deeply wrong about it. Something that lingered beyond the tragedies of history. It was as if the dead refused to move on, their pain anchoring them to this ruined village. The stories I'd heard suddenly felt too real. I fumbled for my notebook, intending to write down my impressions. But as I opened it, a sudden weight pressed down on me, an ache in my chest, and a feeling of being watched. Slowly, I lifted my gaze from the page and saw a figure at the end of the street. She was small, maybe a girl of 10 or 11, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress. Her eyes were dark, her expression blank. She stood perfectly still, hands at her sides. My voice caught in my throat. I blinked once, and she was gone. Panic fluttered in my stomach. I tried to reason with myself. This place was notorious. I'd read horror stories and accounts online. Perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't deny the chill that clung to my bones, or the certainty that I had seen something that shouldn't be there. I decided to leave. As I made my way back toward the entrance, the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the village itself resented my departure. Footsteps echoed behind me, light, almost playful. I turned abruptly, shining my flashlight. Nothing moved, yet I could swear I saw a shadow dart behind a broken wall. The voices began then, faint and drifting on the wind. Fragments of conversation, laughter, and screams. They overlapped, creating a discordant symphony of the past. I covered my ears, trying to shut them out, but they persisted, weaving in and out of my consciousness. At the edge of the village, I felt a tug on my jacket. I yelped, spinning around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly. There was no one, just empty air. Yet the tug had felt real, as if a small hand had tried to hold me back. "Stop it," I whispered through clenched teeth, my voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I can't help you." The wind sighed, and for a moment, I thought I heard a whisper, "Don't leave us." My heart sank with a wave of sorrow and guilt. I had stumbled into their world. These restless spirits trapped in a time of violence and pain. They wanted someone to listen, to remember, to understand what they had lost. But what could I do? I was just one person, alive in a world that had moved on. While they remained caught in the nightmare of 1944, tears stung my eyes, and I hurried forward, determined to escape the suffocating grasp of Oradour-sur-Glaine's past. As I finally passed through the old gate and reached my car, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The air outside the village smelled sweeter, and the distant hum of traffic reminded me that I was back in the land of the living. Yet my mind still reeled, haunted by the images and sounds that defied explanation. I climbed into my car and started the engine, hands trembling. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the gate. There was no one, just the ruins silhouetted against the fading light. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something unfinished in Oradour-sur-Glane. Nightmares plagued my sleep, faces without names, voices begging for help, laughter twisted into screams. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was the power of suggestion, the weight of a dark history pressing into my subconscious. But I knew better. I had felt their presence, touched the edge of their world. The spirits of that devastated village still wandered its shattered streets, clinging to what little remained of their lives. They reached out to anyone who dared enter their domain, hoping against hope that someone might finally bring them peace. I never returned to Oradour-sur-Glane. The memory of that cold afternoon, the whispers in the wind, and the look in the eyes of that silent child were enough to remind me that some wounds never heal. The village stands as a testament to cruelty and suffering, a place where the past refuses to rest. And though I escaped with my life and sanity intact, I know that a part of me remains there, trapped among the ruins, listening to the endless echoes of voices long dead, carried on the silent, sorrowful wind. Story number 6. Whispers on the Queen Mary. I've always been fascinated by the stories that linger in the shadows, the echoes of the past that refuse to fade away. When I heard about the Queen Mary, a once majestic ocean liner turned abandoned hotel in Long Beach, California, I knew I had to experience its haunting firsthand. As a journalist with a penchant for uncovering the truth behind ghostly legends, the Queen Mary was the perfect subject for my next investigation. The ship loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette a stark contrast against the night sky. Lights flickered sporadically along its deck, casting eerie reflections on the calm waters below. The entrance was guarded by tall, rusted gates that creaked ominously in the breeze, setting the tone for what awaited inside. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. The air was thick with anticipation, the salty scent of the ocean mingling with the musty aroma of the abandoned vessel. Armed with my camera, voice recorder, and a notebook, I stepped through the gates and approached the main entrance. The lobby was grand yet decayed, marble floors cracked and stained, and chandeliers hanging precariously from the ceiling. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I made my way through the empty halls, each step echoing louder than the last. The stories were true. Doors swung open and closed on their own, and faint whispers seemed to follow me from room to room. As I explored deeper into the ship, the temperature dropped noticeably, a chill that wasn't there before. My breath became visible, fogging in the cold air. I entered what was once the grand ballroom, now a ghostly shell of its former glory. The walls were adorned with peeling wallpaper, and the grand piano stood silent, its keys yellowed and cracked. Suddenly, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from the far end of the room. My heart raced as I turned towards the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A figure materialized near the center of the ballroom, a woman dressed in a flowing white gown. Her face was pale, eyes hollow and filled with an indescribable sorrow. She stood motionless, staring directly at me. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. She didn't respond, just continued to watch me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I took a hesitant step forward, trying to understand what was happening. Without warning, the woman vanished, leaving behind a gust of cold wind that extinguished the candles lining the room. The sudden darkness was suffocating, and for a moment, I felt completely alone. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but curiosity held me in place. I moved towards the stairs, the grand staircase leading to the upper decks. As I ascended, the whispers grew louder, filling the air with fragmented phrases and cries of despair. Reaching the top of the stairs, I found myself in a narrow corridor lined with closed doors. Each door seemed to hold its own secrets, the stories of those who had walked these halls before me. One door stood slightly ajar, and as I approached, I could hear the faint sound of sobbing coming from within. Pushing the door open, I entered a small room that had once been a luxurious suite. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and a large mirror hung on the wall, its surface cracked and smudged. In the reflection of the mirror, I saw her again, the woman in white, now standing directly behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The sobbing intensified, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness emanating from the mirror. Desperate to find answers, I took out my notebook and began jotting down everything I had witnessed. As I did, the door slammed shut behind me, and the room plunged into darkness once more. Panic set in as I fumbled for my flashlight. But it was no use, the device had stopped working, leaving me in pitch black. The whispers turned into agonized screams, and the temperature plummeted, my breath freezing in the air. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the mirror, its icy grip pulling me towards the glass. I struggled, fighting against the unseen force, but it was no use. The room seemed to dissolve around me, and I found myself standing on the deck of the Queen Mary, the ocean stretching out endlessly before me. The woman in white stood at the bow, her face contorted with anguish. "Help us," she cried, her voice echoing across the water. "Set us free." I looked around, realizing that the ship was alive with restless spirits, each one bound to the Queen Mary by their tragic pasts. The whispers became unified cries, a chorus of lost souls yearning for release, determined to honor their plea. I knew I had to uncover the truth behind their suffering. Returning to the lobby, I delved into the ship's history, uncovering stories of abuse, neglect, and untimely deaths. The Queen Mary had been a place where dreams were made and broken, where the line between life and death was blurred by the harsh realities faced by its residents. Many of the spirits I encountered were victims of the ship's dark past, their lives cut short by violence and despair. One story stood out, the tale of Eleanor Hayes, a nurse who had worked on the Queen Mary during its final years as a state school. Eleanor had been a beacon of hope for the patients, but her compassion was met with resistance from the administration. Tensions escalated, leading to a tragic incident where Eleanor was found dead in her quarters under mysterious circumstances. As I pieced together the events leading to Eleanor's death, I realized that her spirit, along with others, was trapped in an endless loop of pain and regret. To free them, I had to bring their stories to light, ensuring that their suffering would not be forgotten. Armed with this knowledge, I organized a memorial on the ship, inviting those who had experienced the haunting phenomena to share their stories. As we gathered on the deck, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and sorrow. One by one, the witnesses recounted their encounters, their voices intertwining with the lingering spirits. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the ocean, the oppressive energy that had once filled the Queen Mary began to dissipate. The spirits, now acknowledged and remembered, found peace, their cries silenced by the truth finally being told. I watched as the woman in white gave one final, grateful smile before fading into the morning light. The Queen Mary, once a vessel of tragedy and torment, stood serene and silent, its haunted legacy finally laid to rest. Driving away from the ship, I felt a profound sense of closure. The Queen Mary had shared its darkest secrets, and in doing so, had allowed its restless souls to find peace. The experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the unseen struggles that lingered in the shadows. And every time I pass by Willowbrook State School or hear tales of the Queen Mary's haunting, I remember that night on Maple Street, the whispers of the past, and the importance of giving voice to the voiceless. Because in the heart of darkness, there are stories waiting to be told, souls yearning for redemption, and a reminder that even in the most haunted places, there is hope for peace and healing. Story number 7. Whispers of Willowbrook. I've always been drawn to places with a dark history. There's something about the echoes of the past that call out to you, begging to be heard, to be understood. Willowbrook State School in Staten Island, New York, was one such place, abandoned since its closure in 1987. The sprawling complex stood as a haunting reminder of the suffering endured by its patients. Stories of abuse, neglect, and unimaginable pain lingered in the air, making Willowbrook a magnet for those seeking the truth behind the shadows. It was a cold October evening when I decided to visit Willowbrook. As a journalist with a penchant for uncovering hidden truths, I couldn't resist the allure of the abandoned institution. Equipped with my camera, voice recorder, and a notebook, I set out to document the lingering spirits and the untold stories of the past. Driving through Staten Island, the precinct's old gate loomed ahead, rusted and overgrown with ivy. The once majestic entrance now stood decrepit, the sign barely legible through the layers of grime. I parked my car and approached the building, the weight of its history pressing down on me. The windows were shattered, and the doors hung loosely on their hinges, creaking ominously with every gust of wind. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. My flashlight pierced through the darkness, revealing the vast, empty corridors that once bustled with activity. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, peeling away to expose the cold, bare plaster beneath. Every step I took echoed through the empty halls, a stark reminder of the lives that had been lost within these walls. As I ventured deeper into Willowbrook, the temperature seemed to drop, a chill that wasn't there before. I reached the central wing, where the wards were located, and the oppressive silence was almost tangible. It was here that the most disturbing reports had come from, patients and staff claiming to hear strange noises and see apparitions in the dead of night. I set up my equipment in one of the old patient rooms, hoping to capture any supernatural activity. The room was sparse, with a single bed pushed against the wall and remnants of old medical equipment scattered across the floor. I began recording, speaking softly into the microphone. "This is Jack Morgan, reporting from the abandoned Willowbrook State School. Tonight, I aim to uncover the truths that linger in these walls." Minutes passed with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the distant drip of water from a leaky ceiling. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, a faint noise reached my ears, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood. I froze, straining to listen. The sound was coming from the hallway outside the room. Gathering my courage, I approached the door, the beam of my flashlight illuminating the dark corridor. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and then abruptly stopped. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response, just silence. I turned to return to the room, but as I did, I felt a presence behind me, spinning around. I was met with the sight of a shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered dress, her face obscured by long, unkempt hair. Her eyes, hollow and filled with sorrow, seemed to pierce through me. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of my pounding heart. I took a step forward, but she vanished before my eyes, leaving behind a lingering chill. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Was it a ghost? A figment of my imagination? Couldn't be sure, but the fear was real. Determined to get to the bottom of Willowbrook's mysteries, I delved into the history of the institution. Records revealed a grim pattern of abuse and mistreatment. Hidden away from the public eye, patients were subjected to inhumane treatments, their voices silenced by those meant to care for them. The death toll was staggering, with many patients never being officially declared dead, their families left in the dark. One night, as I was reviewing old case files, I heard it again, the soft tapping from the hallway. This time, I was prepared, armed with a second flashlight and my voice recorder. I moved toward the source of the sound. The corridor was dark, the only light coming from my flashlight and the faint glow of the moon filtering through the broken windows. As I reached the end of the hallway, I saw her again, the woman in white. This time, she was closer, her expression one of desperate anguish. "You have to help us," she cried, her voice echoing through the empty halls. I approached her cautiously, keeping my distance. "What happened here? Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked down, tears streaming down her face. "We were forgotten, our pain ignored. Help us find peace." Before I could respond, the temperature dropped further, and the walls seemed to close in around me. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and the whispers of the past filled the air. The weight of the suffering endured by the patients pressed down on me, a heavy burden that I couldn't ignore. I knew I had to do something. These spirits were trapped, their stories untold, their anguish unacknowledged. Determined to bring their pain to light, I decided to share their stories with the world, to ensure that Willowbrook's dark history would never be forgotten. Days turned into weeks as I continued my investigation, interviewing former staff members, reviewing old recordings, and documenting every piece of evidence I could find. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became to honor the memories of those who had suffered within Willowbrook's walls. One evening, as I was about to leave, I heard a familiar voice calling my name. Turning around, I saw the woman in white once more, her presence more defined than ever. "Thank you," she whispered, a faint smile crossing her face. "You've given us hope." As she faded away, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of peace that hadn't been felt in decades. The whispers and shadows seemed to recede, leaving behind only the lingering echoes of the past. I left Willowbrook that night with a heavy heart, knowing that the souls of those who had been forgotten were finally finding the peace they so desperately sought. The experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the unseen struggles that lingered in the darkest corners of the world. Willowbrook State School remains abandoned to this day, a silent sentinel to the tragedies that unfolded within its walls. But now, its stories are no longer confined to the shadows. Through my efforts, the voices of the past have been heard, ensuring that the suffering endured by its patients will never be forgotten. And sometimes, on quiet October nights, I can still hear the faint echoes of Willowbrook's past, a reminder that even in death, the quest for peace and justice continues, because in the heart of darkness, there are stories that must be told, souls that yearn for redemption, and a truth that demands to be revealed.